Hello, welcome back to Football League World TV. It's time for the latest episode of the debate, and here we're looking at the state of play at Huddersfield Town, given that Danny Schofield has now left the role as manager. I'm your host, George Dagless, and joining me this morning is Toby Wilding. Toby, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. Another sort of really interesting week or midweek in the EFL, isn't it? And obviously the movement at Huddersfield has just really topped that off and been the big story. I don't think it's a massive surprise, but it is certainly one that sets up an intriguing few days for the Terriers in their manager search, and then obviously who they managed to get in could have massive implications for the rest of the season and the Championship. So definitely going to be interesting to take a look at what's going on over there now.
Yeah, certainly been a interesting few days at Huddersfield and a disappointing start to the season as well for the Terriers, especially given how last year was going. At Huddersfield fans, we are live across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter for the next 20, 25, maybe even 30 minutes. So let us know your thoughts. What's going on at your club? Who would you like to see come in as well and replace Danny Schofield? Let's get going. Toby, let's talk Schofield first of all at the top of this show. What were your initial thoughts when the news came through that he'd been sacked? I guess perhaps not massively surprising given the start that Huddersfield have had.
No, not a huge surprise at all. If I'm being honest, I think sort of looking back to the summer and the departure of Carlos Corberán after what an outstanding job he'd done there last season, I was almost perhaps more surprised that following his exit, it was Schofield that Huddersfield did settle on to take charge. I think when you sort of consider his lack of experience as a sort of first team manager, it sort of felt like a bit of a risk to rely on him to sort of try and build on the good work that Corberán had done, and it didn't really feel like it was perhaps sending out the message of intent that that Huddersfield was still going out to sort of back up and build on what they did last season in getting to the Championship playoff final. And certainly that is something we've seen in the results so far. They just haven't been able to get going under Schofield at all, and it's very much a worrying position that they are in already this season, Huddersfield. The fact that they haven't been able to build on that, and that there is really only Coventry, who obviously have those games in hand, that are below them in the Championship table at the minute. So I definitely think in that sense it was probably the right decision to make when you sort of look at some of the fixtures that Huddersfield have slipped up in as well recently. There's been some games that were probably ones you would expect them to win if they are going to sort of keep their heads above water this season. So I do think it probably makes sense to make this decision now, while there is still as well plenty of time for whoever comes in to sort of rectify the situation. Again, with maybe some games on the horizon that on paper are perhaps ones that, again, the Terriers need to win if they are going to get themselves out of trouble. And as well, it sort of gives whoever does come in that sort of time that he might need to assess the squad, work out what he needs and what he may be able to get in the January transfer window as well, to sort of help Huddersfield in the second half of the season. So overall, I don't see this as being a major surprise, and it does seem like perhaps the right decision for Huddersfield to take, even if it might be a difficult one for them, given obviously Schofield's connection with the club.
Let's just talk about Schofield and his future. Obviously, it's not gone well, but do you think there can be some sort of silver lining for him in the fact that the circumstances he came in, it was towards the end of the summer. Corberán, there's every intention of Corberán staying, really wasn't there, and it was a bit of a, it was obviously a shock when Corberán left, and given the way last season happened as well, Schofield's gone in there and almost, in a way, had to do a little bit of firefighting before the season started, just in terms of the sheer shock that went around the club when Corberán left. So, do you think he can leave with some credit, just given the circumstances he was involved in?
Yeah, I don't think this is a complete 100% write-off now for him in football or anything like that. I think, as you say, obviously it's not worked out for him taking on the main role of a first team head coach or manager. But certainly, you look back to what Huddersfield, as you say, did last season, perhaps unexpectedly in terms of making it all the way to the Championship playoff final. Schofield, well, obviously wasn't leading the side at that time. He had a part to play in that. So that does have to, if you'll give him some credit in the bank when it comes to looking for a future role. And I think also, as you say, it was difficult circumstances. It was sort of very late on in the summer. He probably wouldn't have been expecting to be thrown in at the deep end there at Huddersfield with Corberan leaving. And again, as I think we'll probably touch on shortly in a bit more detail, the squad that he has had available to him has perhaps not been as strong as the one that Corberan had last season, and perhaps some of those key players who played such a big role in Huddersfield getting as far as they did last season haven't fired to that same level so far this time around. So that as well is something that will have perhaps made life harder for Schofield, and therefore means that he does have a bit of a case to make for himself going forward when he's perhaps looking for other roles in the game.
Yeah, we'll have to see what comes up for next. Might be best just to have a little bit of a break just to decompress after what's obviously been a tough couple of months for him. But yeah, like you say, if he goes into the right situation, there's every chance that things could work out a bit better for him. Let's talk about the squad then, Toby, and results so far. You look at where they are in the table. Obviously, as you mentioned, just ahead of Coventry, but Coventry's still got a couple of games in hand. Given the issues they had around their pitch, just 4 points from the 8 games Huddersfield have played so far, just the 1 win. We'll talk about the players that left and weren't replaced in a minute, but let's talk about the ones that are still there. Across the board, it seems like most of them just haven't reached the levels of last season, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly, the likes of Danny Ward, not necessarily prolific last season at all, but he was someone or him or Jordan Road you would expect to find right place, right time of playing finishes. That sort of hasn't come yet this season. I think Silver Thomas, he still got a few assists in there, but he doesn't seem to be quite producing that consistency again that we saw from him last season. But I think as well, sort of, you look at the players, as you say, we'll touch on them that went out in a moment. There's a lot of Championship experience that has sort of departed the club there, and sort of I look at those that have come in, and with the exception of, say, Conor Mahoney, who hasn't got that game time yet, still working his way up to fitness before he really plays a part for the first team, and Michael Hellick, only came in from Barnsley on deadline day, and who of course is off the back of a relegation of his own last season. But other than them two, I don't really see a lot of Championship experience in those players that were brought in to the club over the summer transfer window either. And I do think that is something that is potentially hindering Huddersfield as well. And I mean, as I touched on there with Ward and Rhodes, it is showing in the goals column, certainly. Looking at Huddersfield, just the 8 goals in the Championship season so far. There's only, I think I was counting up 3 teams who've got less than that. Swansea, who joined them in the relegation zone. Coventry, who, as we've touched on, have got games in hand, and then Preston, who've just got the 3. But obviously the anomaly there with Preston is how solid they are in defence. So that's almost for them cancelling out that issue, and Huddersfield don't have that at the minute either. So yeah, there certainly looks to be a fair few problems sort of in that squad, potentially even beyond the situation with Schofield that are going to need to be addressed and rectified somehow, maybe if Huddersfield are going to get out of trouble.
Yeah, let's talk about the window then, because that obviously seems to be one of the sort of root causes of where they are at the moment. Some decent players came in, didn't they? You like to Jack Rodoni and Tyrese Simpson. Obviously, you mentioned Mahoney there as well. But on the front of it, it's either young players that have got a point to prove or are still developing, or players that are a little bit older but don't necessarily have the Championship experience. And someone like Will Boyle, for example. And then you look at the players that left, some real key names like Lewis O'Brien and Harry Toffolo, among others. They were always going to be tough to replace, weren't they? Particularly, in the case of O'Brien. But do you think? And I guess this comes to the point why Corberán left the club. Do you think the owners did enough to try and sort the situation out in terms of players they were going to leave? I think Huddersfield probably, as soon as they knew they weren't going up, it was quite likely that O'Brien in particular would be going, and it just seemed that the ambition wasn't there maybe to build on what was a successful season last year.
Yeah, it does have that sort of sense, doesn't it? As you say, you look at where they were sourcing a lot of those players from, sort of either coming in as free agents or sort of from League One where the prices aren't going to be as big. And I mean, it's one of them. It's understandable with the way finances are at the minute that you can't massively spend. But again, you look at the sort of the players that you're bringing in comparison to the ones that have gone. Lewis O'Brien, as you say, a massive sort of figurehead in the centre of that midfield for Huddersfield. You're really going to miss a player with his sort of influence. Although, as you say, I think it was always, once it was clear Huddersfield were going to be a championship team again this season, it was always going to be hard for them to keep hold of him with the sort of Premier League links that were emerging. But nevertheless, it means that they've lost such a commanding presence in the centre of the park. Harry Toffolo as well, obviously another one who went to Forest. He too, such a creative outlet from that sort of left wing back role, was sort of outstanding, really important player in that position last season. So those are two massive influences. And I think as well, you sort of look at, say, someone like Naby Sarri, who's moved on. Obviously, he's not the headline grabber like those other two, but he did sort of bring that experience, sort of presence in the centre of defence, and he was one who you could generally rely on to do a job, as he's sort of generally showing already at Reading this season. I think when you consider the fact that that was a simple case of an expiring contract, so that there is perhaps a question there as to why that simply wasn't addressed, as opposed to going out and getting someone like a Will Boyle, who again free agent, didn't have to pay a fee, but instead you're bringing in someone who doesn't have that sort of experience in the Championship. So there are perhaps questions there about the sort of decisions that Huddersfield made in the way they put together their squad for this season. Perhaps there were sort of differences of opinion behind the scenes with the Sarr contract. Who knows what went on there that maybe meant that wasn't feasible, but certainly from the outside it does seem a bit strange that a decision wasn't taken to hand a new contract out there, when you consider the route that Huddersfield went down instead. And again, as we've touched on in attack, I do feel that they probably have left themselves a bit short. Only Tyrese Simpson really going in there to back up Ward and Rhodes, and he's obviously a good player with a great deal of potential, but you sort of look at his career so far, he's not really even got that much experience at League One level. It's only really that stint at Swindon in the first half of last season that has sort of caught the eye. But again, that was a League Two spell, so it's a big step up from there for him. So when we're talking about this lack of goals that Huddersfield are perhaps struggling a bit with at the minute, there is a concern that they have perhaps left themselves short in that position to rectify it. So I do think even beyond the Schofield situation, they have perhaps not done themselves too many favours in some areas of their business in the summer transfer window.
Let's look at some of the names that are getting linked with the job then. David Wagner is one of them that's been linked with return to the club. Obviously, he was there when they got themselves into the Premier League. Sean Dyche is a name that is going to be regularly linked with Championship clubs, given the work he did at Burnley. Stephen Schumacher's in there, and Duncan Ferguson's one of the names as well. It currently being suggested to be in the frame. So before we get into who you think it might be a realistic solution, though, do you think there's going to be, how attractive a job is it, Huddersfield, at the moment? They did great stuff last year, but as we've said, the squad is perhaps not where it needs to be in terms of repeating that particular feat. And, there are suggestions, at least, that the owners might not be as ambitious as the fans would like to be, or at least the budget at Huddersfield is perhaps to be expected, not as big as some of the other clubs in the league. So before we get on to who you think would be an ideal candidate, how attractive do you think the job is? I mean, someone like Sean Dyche, for example, potentially might not be that interested in this particular role because he might think something bigger, if you like, in inverted commas, could be just around the corner.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with you there. I think that is probably the sort of point that I was going to make about Sean Dyche. I think when you sort of look at those four options you just sort of laid down there, for me, Dyche is probably the standout one that I do think Huddersfield fans would be leaning towards if they had a choice where, sort of money and other issues are no option. If it was a simple case of you can pick one, who would it be? I would say out of those four, when you look at the promotion pedigree he has at this level and how well he did with Burnley for so many years in the Premier League, I think he would be the standout choice. But Dyche himself is going to know that, and he's going to know that he will be in demand this summer. And I'm sure after so long in the game with Burnley, he may well be happy to take that bit of an extra break and wait for the right job to come along. And as you say, he's going to want to be backed because if they are bringing him in, you would expect him. While in the short term, it may be a case of just making sure Huddersfield stay in the Championship this season. In the long term, if you're bringing someone like Sean Dyche in, then there is going to be an expectation among the fans that eventually a push for promotion back to the Premier League will come. And whether or not the owners are ready to do that will be sort of potentially quite telling, because if Dyche is going to be coming in and knowing that there will be that expectation on his head, he's going to want to be backed to give him the best chance of living up to that expectation. And there may be questions for him about whether he will get that when you, as you say, you look at the business and the talk about the budget that there is at Huddersfield. So certainly that is something I think that will obviously play on the minds of other candidates as well, sort of depending on what positions they are in. You sort of look down into League One and there are probably managers there who will sort of, jump at that opportunity to manage in the Championship, because it is that step up in level that they might not get again in their careers. But as I say, on the contrast, there are certain more established managers at the higher levels, or who have been at the higher levels, such as Dyche and even say Duncan Ferguson, who certainly looks like he could be, again, one in demand given how well he has done behind the scenes and when stepping in as caretaker at Everton, who might feel that given the challenging position Huddersfield are in right now and with the squad they've got, it is perhaps not worth taking that risk in terms of, the relegation that may or may not end up on their CV and finding themselves in a job in League One. So, yeah, I think certainly for whether or not it's an attractive job is probably going to depend on what sort of manager Huddersfield are approaching, in my opinion.
And just on the managerial search, we've seen Huddersfield have, I guess they like to roll the dice at times, don't they, with their managerial appointments. Corberan was obviously a bit of a gamble, and it paid off, almost brilliantly. Nearly got them promoted to the Premier League. And again, they, in some respects, it was a gamble with Scofield. Obviously he knew the club, but that lack of experience was there. Given their precarious position, even though it is early days in the Championship, Toby, do you think they maybe need to, assess their just general approach to managerial appointments at the moment? Is it time they just, at least for this next appointment, they go for a safer pair of hands that's tried and tested in terms of Championship survival, or do they stick to what they've been doing so far and hope that they find themselves another Carlos Corberan?
Yeah, it's almost a very difficult situation for them in that sense, because you would certainly say with the position they are in now, for me, it looks like they need someone who can go in there and quickly sort of turn things around, and the best sort of option for that is someone who knows this division well. and who can quickly get the best out of the squad. But again, it's one of them. If you are going to be tempting a manager with that sort of experience and know-how at this level, they are the sort that you would imagine are more likely to go to want to be expected to be backed in the transfer window. And as we've already sort of touched upon, looking at this summer and that talk about the budget, whether or not Huddersfield are either willing or able to do that is not exactly clear at the minute from the looks of things. So that sort of puts the board, I would say, in a very tricky situation, especially when you consider, again, looking at the fan base and the sentiment there and their concerns about, perhaps the financial situation at the club. They too would probably like to see one of those safer, more established pairs of hands coming in, A, to give them a better chance of getting out of trouble, but also B, to show that Huddersfield do have that intent behind the scenes to push on from this, not just getting out of the bottom three, but then working the way back up the table again. So yeah, it looks to me like it could be a rather tricky situation for the board when it comes to finding the man to take over from Schofield.
Certainly one they need to get right, though, given where they sit currently in the Championship table. Toby, let's just get to the conclusion then. Is there a name particularly that you can see going in there and you think would be a good fit for Huddersfield? And I guess the big question is, where do you see the rest of this season going for them? It is obviously still early days and things can turn around quickly. But at the moment, they're in the relegation zone and they need to get out of there as soon as they can. Yeah,
I think sort of from the ones that we've been discussing here and considering the circumstances, as I said, Dyche probably the standout if money and other issues are no object, but they are. So I would be surprised if that happened. Personally, I think one that could be quite sensible is probably David Wagner. Certainly, obviously, he's out of work at the minute, so that sort of solves the issue of any sort of compensation or negotiation that might drag this out at a time when Huddersfield probably need an appointment quickly. The success he has there, obviously, it means that A, he knows this level, he knows what he's doing there, and B, he will be a popular choice among the fans. And I think it wasn't that long ago that he was back at a Huddersfield game, I believe, just earlier this season. So certainly it looks as though there is still that connection there that could help. And I think that is probably something that will give the club a big lift. Certainly within the fan base, as I say, a popular choice, he would have that backing, and that would likely translate to the players on the pitch that could give them that lift. And so, yeah, I think Wagner is probably the standout candidate for me, because again, I mean, you never know, there might be issues around transfers, or he may feel the fact that connection with the club, maybe it means he will just be ready and willing to go in there and help them out if possible. Who knows? Only those close to it, but definitely for me, I do think someone who is realistic and would be a solid option to do the job. For me, Wagner feels like the standout in that sense, looking at those options we've been talking about. Okay, we shall see. Just before we go, Wayne's got in touch on YouTube. Good to have you with us as ever, Wayne. Huddersfield will be all right. They will not go down. So, positive prediction there for the Terriers from Wayne. They'll obviously be hoping that Wayne's spot on with that one, but currently, obviously, in a bit of a predicament, aren't they? The Yorkshire Club. That's been the debate on Football League World TV. One other show to tell you about coming up on the channel later on this afternoon at 2 p.m. Sam Rourke hosting that one with Marcus Ali. 2 winners and 2 losers from the EFL midweek. Plenty of action going on, wasn't there? Earlier this week, plenty of games and results to talk about. So tune in to that one. Toby, thanks for joining me this morning. Great to get your thoughts on all things Huddersfield. And those that have been watching at home, do remember to subscribe to Football League World TV on YouTube and like this video as well if you can. It'd be greatly appreciated by all of us here. But for myself and Toby, it's bye for now.